All right, so here's the deal. For paper 4, you need to start by writing a thorough introduction, right? Now, this is going to be the most difficult thing for you to do, considering the fact that you don't have a whole lot of time at your disposal right now, right? I mean, you've got a week to write this paper, less than a week. And usually, during a semester, students have a month to write this paper. So, gathering the research, being able to read, analyze, evaluate the research. I mean, we're asking you to do it in a truncated time form that's really unfair in a way, but it's the nature of the business of being in the summer class. So just let's go back to Keith's point. I mean, Keith's talking about tennis elbow, and he was saying, what he was looking at is a lot of the research was variable based on the fact that some treatments were considered long-term and some treatments were considered short-term. Come on in. We're just getting started talking about all of this. So this makes the introduction even more valuable, right? Because you have to establish whether you are looking at this long-term or short-term, right? It would be irresponsible, foolish, and I would say even ignorant to try to compare a short-term treatment with a long-term treatment, because they don't intend to do the same things. They're not one's not intending to accomplish the same task as the other one. So how can you compare them? So this goes right back to my point about you need to be doing some critical thinking here about all these different treatment options that are out there in order to determine that these are the 2 treatment options that are the best, right? You may not have, from paper 2, the 2 best treatment options in your conversation, right? I mean, what you did in paper 2 may not be accurate. So considering what you're trying to accomplish, right, you can't do this. You can't narrow it down. So let's say you're doing something like osteoarthritis. I mean, there's literally probably hundreds of treatments out there for osteoarthritis, right? How are you supposed to manage that? Well, you manage it based on what type of patient population we're looking at, right? If you're talking about mild forms of osteoarthritis, there's going to be hundreds of options. If you're talking about moderate forms, well, the options become much more narrow, right? If you're talking about severe forms, you're talking about very few, because you're talking about surgeries and those kind of things, replacements. So for tennis elbow, though, if you're going to determine that these 2 are the best and that these are the 2 you're going to compare, you have to establish the criteria by which you're going to evaluate those 2 treatments, right? So the operational definition is the guidepost that's going to help you establish how you got to these 2 treatment options in the first place. With paper number 2, I let you just pick whatever, and then I beat you up for making bad decisions, right? So that's all right. I mean, you're going to learn from your mistakes. The only way you're going to learn how to read research and understand it and think about it this way, right, is to go through the process and experience some success and some failures. So that operational definition, that discussion about what are the criteria that I'm going to use in order to determine this, is all going to be dealing with those factors like time and your patient population, right? What is the severity of the condition? Those kind of things. That's going to help you narrow it down so that you can say, all right, if I've got all these things, let's say with the tennis elbow example, that you're talking about a moderate form or something like that, because obviously things like that are more mild, you're just going to say brace it, right? And the bracing and rest and those kind of things, just stop doing it for a while and it'll go away and that kind of thing. But you're probably not going to be treating a mild cases of that, because that's going to be a frontline treatment. You're going to end up with a referral to someone who's got a more serious condition, right? So now you start thinking to yourself, all right, if I've got people who are in that level of severity of, let's say, the moderate form, right? This is helping me establish my patient population. This is going to narrow down my treatment options. So now I've got to start thinking to myself, all right, well, what are my treatment options? Are there injectables? Are there things like ultrasound or laser therapies and all these other things that are going on? Some of them approved, some of them unapproved, right? So what are all the different options that are out there? I mean, tell me what's going on. I mean, then I know there's strengthening and stretching exercises and those kind of things. So the other thing to think about is that a lot of times the strengthening and stretching exercises are included in as a conjunction right, a treatment conjunctive with something else, right? You do a corticosteroid injection and then do the strengthening and stretching on the outside. Who wouldn't do that, right? It seems like logic. So you could think to yourself, well, all right, if I'm looking at all these different treatment options and I've got injectables, I've got the strengthening and stretching, maybe there's some strengthening and stretching exercises that are different than others. Maybe we should be doing, or maybe we should do strengthening and stretching with bracing versus injectable with strengthening and stretching. You could end up with kind of combination treatments. You know what I'm saying? So my point is you could resolve all this in the introduction, right? I'm expecting the introductions to be probably 2 to 4 pages in length, right? You got to sift through all this stuff and figure it all out, get to a point where you can say, hey, based on these criteria, I've got these 2 treatment options, which are my best, and that this one is better than that one's better than this one. They're both equally efficacious or they're both equally inefficacious. That's your 4 choices for your thesis. Either A is better than B, B is better than A, they're both equal in getting the job done, or they're both equal in not getting the job done. You with me on this, right? So that introduction is going to be like a mini research paper unto itself, right? But I'm not expecting you to go into much depth and detail here because you can't make these decisions based on conjecture, right? You can't make these decisions based on what your Aunt Sally told you, right? Because your Aunt Sally doesn't know what she's talking about, right? We're no longer operating in the world where, you know, hearsay is king, right? This is the problem with our society today, right? People want to believe things, right? They go to the internet, they sit in this little isolated world, they read this crap on the computer, and they think it's right without making informed decisions, right? Blind leading the blind. You want to know why people do stupid things, right? Because they have stupid friends. Every mother ever tell you, hey, garbage in, garbage out, right? You hang around with stupid people, you're going to be stupid. Make sense? Right, because that's your mode of gathering information, right? You're getting bad information, you're internalizing it, and you're becoming like them. So now we can't do that anymore because we're operating as professionals, right? So we have to be critical about everything that we read. And you know, based on what you read in paper 3 and what you read in paper 2, everything is faulty, right? You could literally go through every research article that you pick up, and by what you did in paper number 3, tear it apart and demonstrate that this has got weaknesses and flaws that just can't be justifiable. Easily done. But we've got to do something, right? We can't just operate in this world that science is a pure science, that medical science is pure, because it's not. It's faulty. We know that because we're going to rely on randomized patient populations, right? We can't study the world's populations. I mean, some people were saying, oh, well, in paper number 3, we should have had a bigger patient population. No kidding. We'd love to have the world's patient population under here, but we can't study it. It's unreasonable. So what do? We randomize. We get a sample population, and then we project that sample population as being representative of the rest of the world's population. We know it's not an accurate representation, but we know statistically that it's pretty close, right? 95%, that's what we shoot for. So my point out of all of this is that what you have to do is that you may even make decisions based on the fact that, hey, you know what, there's just not enough research evidence out here. Maybe for some of these treatments that we're looking at, like let's say you go into the laser therapy. A buddy of mine's a physical therapist, and he's got this laser thing, and it's not approved. He doesn't get paid to use it, but he tells people all the time, hey, let's try it, right? There's these things like dry needling and cupping and all these other kind of strategies that are going on. None of them you're getting paid for, right? But some therapists are saying, hey, this stuff works, or maybe it works for a small percentage of the population. Why not try it? Well, if it doesn't have the research foundation behind it, then it's going to be very difficult to do that, right? You're going to have to be able to justify that what you're doing is evidence-based. But what is evidence? That's the question we started with paper number 1, right? We looked at prayer, and we talked about all the science that goes into prayer, and then we started asking ourselves, well, what kind of evidence do we have? And we started looking at paper number 2, and we started finding, hey, there's these different types of evidences, and some are supported with stats, some are not. There's clinical evidence, there's statistical evidence. We look at paper 3, and we thought to ourselves, hey, we can tear everything apart because evidence in medicine and political and social and legal issues is really weak. So now what do we do? Well, now with paper number 4, you've got to be able to justify that the decisions you're making are based on the body of evidence, right? This is the thing that's key. What the evidence-based practice doesn't mean that we wake up one day and somebody does a study and gives us an answer. That doesn't happen. What we know is that 80% of what's published out there is going to be faulty or inadequate, reversible, whatever. So what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to report that, hey, there's these studies out there that are showing a trend. They're not good, they're not strong, they don't have very good scientific evidence behind them, but maybe there is a study in the line of other studies that does come out as a randomized controlled trial because that's the king, right? Or maybe when you're doing your analyses of the review studies and all the other types. I'm telling you, you get your hands on everything you can possibly read for this, right? Because you want to make an informed decision. So that what you're looking at here is not just, here's a study that gives me an answer. You're saying, here's a body of research that across time and development, we see things moving in the same direction so that once we start seeing all the evidence, even though it's all weak and faulty, and maybe there's a stronger randomized controlled trial down here that kind of verifies all this, that this is the best level of evidence that we can get because everybody seems to be showing the same thing. But what I'm expecting you to find is that you're going to see some studies that are going to go this direction, and some studies are going to go this direction, and then you're going to have to look at the studies and say, well, who's got the stronger evidence here? Because if the evidence is going in opposite directions, and we've got one study over here that's really weak methodologically, and we've got one over here that's stronger methodologically, right? Well, then we're going to support the one that's got the stronger methods, right? We would be stupid not to. Why would we support something that we know isn't strong methodologically? Am I making sense to you here? Right? So that by the time, you're going to be thinking about this when you're gathering your research, as you're reading these studies and plowing through them, you've got to be thinking to yourself, what level of evidence does this thing have for me? If I were you, I would create that matrix. I talk about it in the video lectures, if anybody's seen the video lectures, right? Just create that chart, right? And put your operational definition criteria across the top, whatever those are, and put your studies over here down this side, and I would just bullet point out what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the things I want to pull out of this, what are the things I don't want to pull out, or what are the things that I want to show that are weak in here that might not make this a strong study, so that by the time you look at all the evidence down, all the studies for this particular criterion, you can determine that, hey, A is better than B in this case, right? Do it that way so that you can visualize the strengths and weaknesses of each of the studies. Because it would be careless, reckless, and foolish to just latch on to a study and say, hey, because they showed me some evidence, I'm going to believe it, right? I got a bridge to sell you if you're going to think that way. Right? We can't be that foolish anymore. So that introduction, right, is going to be key because you've got to establish the criteria that we're going to be doing all the evaluating first, and then you're going to say, based on these criteria, we know that we can kind of narrow it down to these two studies because maybe we don't have good research on these, cite the research that's available, right? We maybe have weak research on some of these studies, or maybe the research is conflicting or something, so that's the reason why you want to avoid a treatment. Maybe you just see that they don't have the outcomes that you're looking for. Great, eliminate them. But then get down to the two that are going to be your strongest competitors so that you can say, hey, based on those criteria, I've got this one, I've got that one, and let's see how these, let's throw them both in a sandbox and let them fight it out and see who's got the better outcomes, right? So that then you write after you finish that introduction, right, because you get through your thesis and you figure out all this stuff, right, then your body paragraphs, this is the hard part, right? You're going to take criterion A, or let's say call it number 1, right, whatever that is right there, right, that's going to become your first body paragraph. You're going to look at all the research from treatment A and all the research from treatment B, but you're not going to just barrage me with summaries of studies, right? You've got to control this information. The key word here is synthesize. You need to take this information and you need to boil it down into its component parts that are relevant to the argument, right? Fish out from there what's important. Don't write me a paragraph summary of one source, a paragraph summary. You do that, I'm not reading. Draw a line across the paper and throw an F on it, right? Because it's not anything that I can digest. No human being can just summarize a bunch of studies and know where you're going with that. right? Your job is to synthesize all this information down, right? And then correlate it, right? So you're analyzing and evaluating the studies. You're finding out what's good, what's strong, what's weak, what's poor about these studies, so that you know what kind of value each one of the studies have. And now you take those values and you lump them all together and you write me a paragraph and you tell me, hey, based on the evidence, what treatment's performing better than this one? So you're going to have conversations in there. I want to see the data come out, but I want to see the data synthesized. I want to see it compared, right? Your whole objective is to compare treatment A to treatment B. And some people are going to say, well, I want to write a great big long paragraph about treatment A and then a great big long paragraph about treatment B. And I'm going to say, what am I supposed to do in that situation? Right? Am I supposed to be taking notes? How am I going to retain all the information from this giant paragraph of A and a giant paragraph of B? My job is to be informed, right? You're the one who's supposed to be controlling all of this. Do the comparison for me. I can't possibly retain all of those data sets from all those different things if you do it that way. Boil it down into a conversation about where is the strength of evidence, what are the weaknesses of the studies that maybe disqualify some but qualify in others. That's what you need to do, right? It's very difficult to do because many of you are just sitting there thinking to yourself, how can I shortcut this situation so I can spend as least amount of time as possible writing Terry Berry's paper, right? Which the fastest way for me to do that would be to write a bunch of summaries and tape them all together and hope to God that he accepts it. That's not going to happen, right? What you need to do is do the critical thinking, right? Read, understand, analyze, evaluate, synthesize, make an argument. All right. Do you understand the concept now? I'm telling you this. I'm putting it on video lecture, right? I'm going to put it up there. But I tell you what, I'm guaranteeing that there's going to be 2 or 3 of you who make this mistake and just go through and just start regurgitating information that they've read, right? I know you can read. I know you can summarize information and write it in a paper, right? You wouldn't be this far along in your academic experience if you couldn't. We're not interested in that sophomoric level of writing. We're interested in now you taking this information and making informed decisions. Right? Good. As long as we know where we are philosophically, I can continue. Right? But I just want to make sure everybody knows what page we're on. Okay. Good. At this point, though, we also have to be aware that you are going to be responsible for this, right? And that's going to now, Cheyenne, are you using, what's your?
Public health.
Yeah, so do they use AMA or do they use APA? Huh? APA, all right, well, you can use APA then if you want. But I'm going to be talking about AMA here. I'm assuming you have some experience with APA that you can, operate by, but everybody else is going to be required to do AMA, right? Because that's going to be what you're going to sleep with this thing under your pillow for the rest of your time here, right? Because that's going to be the guiding force. There's going to be some things that I'm going to talk to you about, though, or that I'm going to say here that aren't even relevant to AMA or APA. It's about just how to avoid plagiarism, right? And these are key things. All right, so as you can see, AMA is chronological citations, right? So when source 1 goes into a paper, and this is something you can avoid because yours is done alphabetically, right? You just list your sources alphabetically. Everybody else is going to have to list their sources chronologically. Now, what's going to happen here, and the reason why some people's papers are going to come derailed, right, is that people are going to miss the chronology problem, right? In other words, here's what's going to happen. As you're traveling down your paper, right, when a new source is introduced, it gets a new number. Right? So as you're writing your paragraph, you're going to get a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. But as you bounce around with your information, you're going to come back to source 1 or source 3, right? But when a new source is introduced, it goes to 5, right? Because it's a new source, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though you're interfering here with these, right? By bouncing back, then go back to 2, and then the next source that comes in gets a 6. What I can't tolerate is when I'm reading like this and all of a sudden I get a source that goes 10, it breaks your chronology, right? Because what I'm doing when I'm reading your paper, I go to your references page, I pull up your sources on my computer in the order that you presented them. And then as you throw out information, I look to see what you're doing. And I'm following the chronology that you're following. If I hit a number, I look at a source, and it's not the source that it's supposed to be, right? What am I supposed to do in that situation? Right? What I do is I scream, I stop reading, and I send you a nasty note and say, you can't count. Right? That's not a good message to be getting at this level, right? So you can't screw around with the numbers here other than just follow the chronology, right? And so then when you go to the references page, and if you want, you can take a look at page 75 or 78 here. There's a good example of what your references page should look like, right? Notice how everything is lined up underneath the author's, first letter of his last name. References is over here on the left-hand side. Numbers are just 1, 2, 3, 4, right down the margin. Okay? Now, all of those forms are generalized for you here on 42. Don't follow this, right? Because there's too much variation in the forms. Make sure you go and you start looking at all the information over here and how to do authors, right? How to do multiple authors. Notice that they want the citations. When you present the author's names in the text, right, you put those numbers right next to the author's names. If it's one author, it's that. If it's two authors, it's that. If it's 3 or more authors, it's et al. With the first author, right? There's no mark of punctuation with et al. It's just do et al. Okay? Some general things that you should probably talk about briefly here. If you take a look down this, right? So if this has more than 6 authors, so you're going to do the first 3 and then et al, right? In the references page. Notice how et al works differently in text versus in the references page. But look at this. Titles of articles are not capitalized. They're sentence style capitalization for your title of your article, right? Meaning that the first word is capitalized and proper nouns are capitalized and nothing else is. Even with subtitles, right? If you have a title that has a subtitle, meaning a colon and then another one, let's give you an example of that. Here we go. Take a look at this example right here. Notice that there's a title, right? Sunscreen use and the risk for melanoma, A, quantitative review. Notice that the A after the colon is not capitalized, right? Sentence style capitalization means that the first word is capitalized, nothing else is unless it's a proper noun. Journals are abbreviated and italicized and capitalized, right? So your journals all take abbreviations. They're all going to be capitalized like this. And where do you find the abbreviations? Well, you go back here to the back of the manual. On page 473 is where the list of journals begins, right? And this goes all the way up to page 500, right? Well, it actually goes over to 479 because at 479, what they tell you is that if your journal isn't in this list, you need to create your own abbreviation following this. So they give you 20-some pages of words that they tell you how to abbreviate for the journal titles. Everybody with me on that, right? So journals, italicized, capitalized, abbreviated. After that, you provide your bibliographic string, which is year, volume. If they have a series number, that's what goes in parentheses, colon, page number, ranges. So it's year, semicolon, volume, series, colon, pages, period. Now, here's the thing that we need to talk about real quick. I just need you to reference this. Most of the information that you're going to be getting is either going to be out of books, which is, here's on page 53, there's an example of books. I was just showing you 51, a bunch of other like journal information. But I'm assuming that most of you are going to be getting your information out of a online journal, right? Which would mean if it's an online journal, it has a URL. The problem is that if you're going to the Daemen College database and you are trying to access information out of our databases, right, a URL is going to be password protected, meaning that you're that great big long 3-line list of numbers, letters, and symbols, right? isn't going to translate on anything, right? There's going to be Damon.com, Damon.edu, whatever, and then there's going to be a list of things. That's not a live link. Even though it says right there on the bibliographic page, live link, it's not a live link, because if you click on that link, automatically it takes you to the Damon College Library sign-in page, right, where you have to have a username and password. A URL is only used if it's a live link, meaning that anybody can type in that address or click it from your document and you get the source. So what you're using most likely out of our databases is not an online journal, because there's not a URL associated with it. In AMA, the only other option that you have, right, would be websites, which that's not it, because we're not talking about a URL, or a database. But the databases, as they refer to a database, are just storehouses of information, not a collection of articles, right? Even though we call our library a database, they don't refer to a database in the same way. Their idea of a database is just a bunch of numbers crunched for you so that you can run a formula, right, and it'll spit out a bunch of data in a bunch of different ways for you, right? So a database in their eyes is not the same as a database in our eyes. So let me go back to this right here. On page 42, as they tell you right here, journals in an online format, right? They don't give you any way to write an online format for our database. So you're going to follow the same situation that you would for print, right? Your author and the forms, article title and sentence style, journal name, abbreviated, italicized, capitalized, your bibliographic string. And since you're not going to have a URL, right, what you will find, what you should look for, is a DOI or a PMID number, not an extension number or any of those other crazy numbers that they put on those bibliographic pages. A PMID or a DOI. PMIDs and DOIs take the place of all this other stuff. So at the end of your pages, all you do is DOI, colon, and I'll give you the example of the page number that this is on. The DOI sorry, it's taking a minute to get there. It's under electronic references beginning on page 63, and then over here on 65, you'll see the examples, right? So as soon as you finish with that page number, you're going to put DOI, lowercase, colon, and then you're going to put that number there, right? So if you have a URL that's live, you can put the URL in there and call it an online journal. If you don't have a URL because it's through the Damon College database, then you use a DOI or PMID numbers. What happens if there's no DOI or PMID number? That's the problem. If that happens, if you have a source that does not have a DOI or PMID, which means it's probably older, right, because everything that's newer we've assigned these numbers to, what you will do is you will simply just write the database name here. So if you got it from PubMed or Medline or CINAHL, not EBSCO or any of the families or hosts, right? You're just talking about the actual database that you're in, right? So we have lists, hundreds of them, right? So whatever database that you're in, put that database name and then your access date, right? So you'll be, if you go back to this example here, notice how they wanted a URL with an access date. If you've got the PMID or DOI, that takes the place of that. You don't have to have an access date. But if you don't have a URL and you don't have a DOI, then just put your database name and the access date, and that will cover it for me. Everybody with me on this? If you have any questions about this, I can always help you out. Yes.
So how do you want the date to be set up?
The date can just be, I'll show you, they'll do it, if I go back here to a, electronic sources, so you'll see how they do the URL and then do access and then December 6, 2005. Okay? That's on page 65. You'll see other things in there like publish dates and update dates, right? For those things that are URLs and that kind of stuff, that's important too, because if the website changes over time, right, if it's a live document, you want to know when you were there, the document looked like this. So if there's an update date, when I go there and I see that the update date is more current than what your date is, well then that's the reason why I might not be able to find your information. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay, so that's AMA in a nutshell. And look, I usually spend a couple of weeks talking about how to do AMA stuff. So I'm hoping that you are going to be able to reference this book and ask questions, right? If you don't know what you're doing, if you're not finding a clear example of it, what you need to be able to do is at least justify why you're doing it in some way, right? That you're seeking to represent it in some way. Just make sure that you're giving me the information that I need in a form that I can find that information, I can reference it, right? I mean, that's my job. I've got to be able to review your sources, right, in order to make sure that what you're saying is legitimate, right? So it's going to take me a while to grade these things, but it's the way it works, right? So make sure you know what you're talking about as you're reading these sources. Okay. Some other things that we can talk about in here. So there's the referencing with the numbers. There's the references page, right, which follows the format. The other issues we want to talk about are essentially the issues of how to avoid plagiarism. And this is something I'm just going to try and boil this down in a short amount of time as possible here. But essentially, in avoiding plagiarism, there's this rule it's not even really, it's not a written rule, but it's essentially something like this, right? That let's say that if you are borrowing information from a source, and let's say you write a bunch of sentences in a paragraph that derive from that source, right? Many people think that because you've written a whole bunch of information about this, if you put your source number here at the end, that this somehow counts for every sentence that you've written previously to that, right? If you do that in this paper, you will fail because you've just committed plagiarism, right? And not only will you fail, but you're going to have a big red X on your transcript and you're going to be removed from your degree program, right? Because you're cheating, you're stealing, you're being unethical. Just understand something. Every sentence in a paper, in a research paper that you write, has to be attributed to a source or it's yours, okay? So when you're writing your analyses and evaluations of the sources, that's your information, right? You're evaluating what the source says. You're telling me what it does. But when you're presenting what the authors do, you have to be responsible to those authors to make sure that that information is represented as theirs. So when you have a situation like this, you need to introduce your source, right? By saying, you know, according to Jones in his article, right? So according to Jones, let's just start there, right? And you're going to put the little number 8 up there, and you're going to tell me what Jones does. And from this point forward, right, what you need to do is, I'm going to put these words up here. This is the rule we operate by, the clear and obvious rule. That once you establish that Jones is the person making this point, right, you can continue talking about the source without putting the number 8 in there over and over again, or an in-text citation in your case. You're not going to have to put the citation in over and over again if the sentence following this is clearly and obviously an extension of the source that you just introduced, right? So, for example, you might want to continue by saying, you know, the study showed, because I would have to be an idiot if I didn't know that the study that you're talking about in this sentence refers to the study that you just introduced in the first sentence, right? It's clear and obvious that I'm continuing the conversation with Jones. The data demonstrated, right? Again, I have to associate that with the study that I'm talking about. It's clear and obvious, and I'm still talking about Jones' study. If you get to a point where you're confused, or maybe you're making some points about it where it's not clearly referencing the article, just go back. You know, Jones also asserts, right? And just keep it focused on the author, so that I know that every sentence that you're providing here is clearly and obviously an extension of the source that you just introduced. So I'm clear that these sentences belong to you. When you write that evaluation sentence, though, so that when you might put the point in here is that, you know, Jones' study fails to accomplish the standard or something like that, or reach the standard, you're not going to put a citation in there because that's your idea, right? You are making a judgment about Jones' study. Therefore, that's not something that Jones claims. That's your idea, your evaluation, your assessment of it. Therefore, that information belongs to you, and that does not carry a citation. Does everyone understand how this is going to work? So as you're analyzing and evaluating and comparing the data, those are all your ideas. Those don't take citations. But as you present the data, you've got to abide by the clear and obvious rule, right? Present the information, give me the source, say, put it right up out front, and have a conversation. Say, hey, this is what these guys are doing. They're telling me this. We good? Right? Because I cannot allow you to continue with this program, right, if you don't understand how to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism can operate in a variety of different ways, too, guys. Let's just be clear about this. Number one, the most egregious form is if you just took someone's paper and put your name on it. That would be stealing, right? That's unethical. That's just stealing. But nobody's that stupid, right, to do something like that. So I'm not worried about that one. What I am worried about, though, sometimes is that people get confused about how to synthesize information down. And they tend to borrow too closely from the source, right? You have to understand, right, that when you take information from a source, you need to be writing it as if it's your analysis of it, not just regurgitating what they say, because I'm not expecting you to have a whole lot of direct quotes in this paper at all. Present their data, tell me what they're claiming, right? But don't get into a habit of reproducing the source. If you find yourself writing a whole lot about the source, you got to back up and say to yourself, whoa, do I really need all this information? What do I need to get to the argument, right? If you need to write about the source and write a whole paragraph summary and do all that, do that on a separate computer, right? Write that on a different document and look at it for yourself, right? Because that's not relevant to what you're doing for me. What I want you to do is boil that down, right? So I'm not expecting to see you going through and having trouble, parsing words out of something so that you can avoid a direct quote or that you can do a good job of representing a paraphrase or something. I'm expecting you to just tell me what they're accomplishing. Right? But if you're too closely tied to the source, you're going to use the language of the source, and that's going to come up in Turnitin.com, and you're going to get hit for plagiarism. That's a problem, right? So be careful. The other thing so being too closely tied to the source, the failure to represent the source accurately in what's yours and what's not yours, right? That's a form of plagiarism. But one of the forms of plagiarism people don't tend to recognize is a misrepresentation of the author's ideas. And this is a key one. This is going to be the one that's going to rear its ugly head for this paper, right? Is that someone's going to read a source, and they're going to want it to say something, right? They're going to want it to feed their side of the argument, their agenda. You have no agenda. You've got to go into this thinking, I don't care who wins the argument. I just want to know who's got the best argument. That's where you should be, right, in your thinking. But there's people out there who get philosophically tied to an argument, and they want it to succeed. And therefore, they start reading the research, and in the course of reading their research, they allow their bias to help them interpret the research. And that's going to be a problem, because if you represent the author in a way that the author did not represent himself, in other words, if you try to tell me that Jones claims something that Jones didn't actually claim, right, you're misrepresenting what that author said, and that's plagiarism. Because you're telling me that this author is taking credit for a point that he didn't make. So be certain that you know what you're talking about, right? Look at those statistics, look at those data sets, and make sure that you know, right, what that stuff means. Because without your ability to read and understand that stuff, you may make the mistake of misinterpreting that author's point. Right? It's always good to read their conclusions, because their conclusions should be pretty straightforward, and they should tell you what they know and don't know. Right? Most of the good researchers will tell you, hey, we found some information here, but we're pretty uncertain about some of the things. In other words, there could be future studies on this. But you've got to be really careful, right? that when someone starts making grand claims, hey, this was evidence to demonstrate that this works, you've got to start throwing questions around and start thinking, well, wait a minute, how do you know that you've got outcomes here? All right? So just be aware of the fact that if you misrepresent an author's information, that's a completely different kind of plagiarism out there. And it's a plagiarism because this is a research paper. You're presenting the research, telling me, hey, if you look at this source, this is what it says. If it doesn't say that, I got to come back to you in the middle of the night, knocking on your door and going, hey, you got a problem here, right? And now we're going to have to sit down and have a long conversation. And those aren't very fun to have. I'm just telling you that now, right? Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns, frustrations, anything you want to say, do, ask before we kind of wrap this up? You probably have individual questions about your topics, which are great. Let's have conversations about those. But if you've got things about anything that I've said here, let's talk about those as well.
Before you have an example, when you just keep in text citations, so you use source 2 and you just keep using that.
Right. If you keep writing source 2 in there, I'm going to write you a nasty note and say, why aren't you abiding by the clear and obvious rule?
Okay.
Right.
So just as long as you have the intro.
Right. Introduce the source, give your number 2, and then if everything is clearly enough. Now look, I mean, if you get into a sentence where it's questionable, whether it's yours or whether it's theirs, well, then stick that number back in there, right? To make sure that it's represented as theirs. There's no problem with oversighting. I don't mind if you're putting citations in just to make sure. But if you just go through and you're just going two all the way down the paragraph because you don't even understand what I'm talking about here, right? That's going to throw my pen faster, right? I'm going to write you a note and say, didn't you pay attention to the lecture I just had? Right? That's the issue there. But I have no problem with you oversighting in those situations where it's questionable who owns the information. Yep. What else? Yeah. Pete.
What about websites that you can type in URL or the PDF they generate?
Yeah.
The research?
Then we go right to that page 65 area where it has electronic resources and they do a whole thing on websites for you right there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't go over that because I really didn't think that many of you would find information in websites, but you're right. I've seen a bunch of PDFs from people already that do have live links. So yeah, that's not a bad place to go. Page 68 actually is a specific page for websites. What else?
So I was thinking at the beginning, so how many sources are we trying to additionally get? You said so.
You get in this question I get all the time. People say, how long does this paper need to be and how many sources do I need? Do your job. I don't know, right? I mean, what you need to do is read everything. Read as much as you can. Get as much information as you can possibly gather for this. Now, if you've got overwhelming amounts of research, then you probably should start looking back just a few years, right, to limit what you've got. Because what good would it be to read stuff from the 70s and 80s, right, when we've got more current research, right? So you can start to limit it to what's more current to help you narrow those things down. But, I can't put a limit on this for you or put goals because some people are going to have, look, I've seen successful papers in here that have been 10 to 12 pages long with 8 to 10 sources. And then I've seen papers that have been 30 to 40 pages long with 50 sources. And they've both been A papers. Right? It's just one has a volume of research that it has to manage where the other doesn't. It just depends on what the material is. Right? I can't really tell you. So, I mean, I'm assuming that you're going to have a couple of pages for your introduction, right? A whole lengthy section on your body section, and I would divide that body up into subsections, like put subheadings in there for each of the criteria that you present. Right? So if you're going to do pain, right, then I would create a subsection for pain and then write like a mini research paper for pain and come to a conclusion. Go to range of motion and write a little mini research paper comparing for that subsection too. But that would be a good way to organize this. So you could even write in there introduction, and then for your second major heading, do a review of the literature, and then for your final section, conclusion. And in the review of the literature section, you'd have all the subsections about your criteria. That make sense?
Yeah. And the last thing is with plagiarism and everything, with how we submit everything to Turnitin.com. obviously a lot of it's gonna be similar or.
Yeah, turnitin.com is going to be just the, the smoke that there might be fire, right? Turnitin.com tells me I'm suspicious. So, I mean, you're going to get your turnitin.com originality report. You're probably going to come back anywhere from, single digits to 17 to 20% plagiarized, because there will be some things in there, data sets, for example, right? The data numbers, the references page often comes back as sometimes if you don't tell it to not put information in direct quotes or not look at information in direct quotes, it'll show that as plagiarism. But ultimately, Turnitin.com is just a tool for me to where that electronic source tells me you need to be suspicious of this writing right here.
I'm thinking more specifically in reference to our own paper too.
Oh, you mean it's going to be repeated?
Yes.
Yeah. And that happens, right? But it's going to reference your paper, right? And so when it shows up in the originality report, it's going to say, this information right here came from Alex, right? And so I'm just going to say, oh yeah, well that's his paper too. Yeah, you can't plagiarize yourself. So. These are good questions.
So for direct quotes, or do we even use them, or?
You're not going to really need them that much because you're synthesizing this all down, right? You're just having a conversation about what all this information means. You're going to have to bring some of the information from the source, I mean, in terms of data, right? I mean, you're going to have to be able to show, hey, they got these numbers, right? And were these numbers relevant to your operational definition, right? And sometimes when you bring in data, you bring in some of the language that goes along with them. So I can see direct quotes coming in that area, but for you to be, look, there's no intellectual enterprise in copying someone's words from a source and pasting them into your paper, right? I can train a monkey to do that. Right? We're not interested in operating at that low level. I'm interested in you being able to synthesize this down and have a conversation with me about what it means.
Yeah, because I noticed when I looked at the term there.
Yeah.
Like when I was citing patient population and the numbers.
Sure, that stuff's going to come.
So
Yeah.
that it was cited with the number or.
Yeah, I mean, if you're bounding that close to it, right, you just put the citation number right next to it. Here's the thing, right? If what AMA says about introducing the source is they want the number right next to the author's name here at the beginning, right? But what you've got to be careful of is that, let's say in the middle of your sentence, you have some directly quoted information. You put that number here, right? But this information also belongs to the source, then you're leaving this information unguarded, right? So the citation really wouldn't belong here. If all this information still belongs to Jones, then that number goes out there. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you put it there, you're telling me it's just up to this point. So this could happen in your source, right? You could be saying, Jones asserts this, but he fails to do something else, right? So you might have to end this part of your sentence with your citation here to say, I'm stopping talking about Jones here, and now I'm going forward with my assessment of Jones. See how I'm inserting the citation to stop that conversation of this? I'm reporting what Jones does here, but I'm interpreting what Jones means here in terms of my argument. So there would be no citation on this half of the sentence because that's my idea. There would be a citation in the first half of the sentence to tell me that that's Jones' idea. Yeah, the same thing applies to APA, right? It's just in-text citations where you're putting author names and years and page numbers if it's directly quoted, right? But most of the time it's just going to be author year. So, but if you start that conversation and you say, according to Jones in the text itself, you don't have to put that citation in there, just put the year in parentheses, and then you can just keep saying, Jones asserts this, and the study demonstrates this, and you don't have to keep hammering away at that citation over and over again. What else have you got?
Do we switch your operational definitions at all?
I'm assuming that the more you read, the more that operational definition will change. The more research you find, the more you're going to realize, yeah, well, maybe I can tighten this up, or maybe I shouldn't even use this criteria. Maybe I should do this instead. I'm assuming that that's all going to come with the more research that you do. So we were talking about plantar fasciitis, right? So here's a really good example of creating the operational definition. One of the things that what you're going to find a ton of in the research is that plantar fasciitis is studied by symptomology, right? In other words, patients are going to be reporting pain at night or pain first step in the morning or whatever, right? There's always some kind of foot pain or something like that. And so they have all these bracing techniques and all those other things in order to stretch that plantar fascia out. And that people in most of the research are just looking at those symptoms. Do I wake up at night because of pain? Is my first step in the morning painful? How painful is it? And they're looking at all these different things. What kind of range of motion do I have in the foot? What's my quality of life like, right? A bunch of really of factors all based around the symptoms of the condition. But once we start looking into more heavy research on this and we start looking deep into the subject, we find that the plantar fascia is causing pain and discomfort because of its thickness. And so what a lot of people have realized is there's a normal range of what a plantar fascia should be in width, and that is 4 to 5 millimeters. That's what normal is. But those people with plantar fasciitis tend to have a plantar fascia with a width of 5 to 7 millimeters. So, seems to me that the subject is clear. Let's reduce the width of the plantar fascia and the symptoms go away, right? But how many people are going to be able to scientifically measure the width of the plantar fascia, right? I mean, what do we have to do when there's like a sonogram or something like that? I mean, how do we study that soft tissue measurement? Really difficult to do. It's going to be really expensive. So most of the studies aren't going to do it. Most of the studies are going to take the cheap way out, which is let's just study the symptoms and see what kind of results we get. But we know that there's a more quantitative measure out there, a physiologic change that's going to tell us that, right? So this is a really good thing that the more research you're going to do, you're going to find a lot of the low-level research out there that's going to say symptom reductions, right? That's all we're going to be working on. But then you're going to find maybe there's 1 or 2 studies out there that say, hey, we studied the width of the plantar fascia and we got to go to this, right? So now you're going to have B-level research, which is all that low stuff, right? Which is just talking about the symptoms versus the A-level research, which is saying, hey, we got measurable results. So that is going to change the operational definition, because now the operational definition is going to have to turn around and it's going to have to say, look, we've got one criterion that we know is probably more important than all the other ones. So we've got these symptom criteria that we know are going to be relevant, but they're not relevant if we don't get the reduction in the width of the plantar fascia. So part of the conversation, the symptoms, but they're not going to be the key factor. So that's what I'm saying. The more you read about this, the more you understand about your condition, the better off you're going to be with being able to devise that operational definition. When I'm saying just keep that operational definition fluid right now, right? Let it kind of just go where, when you start to quantify what your research means with all that scale or that matrix that I was talking about, right? When you start to kind of box it all up and put it into, comparisons, then you can start thinking to yourself, all right, well, if these guys are getting these types of results, then at least I know what's possible and what's relevant. So maybe that helps you start to, reorient your operational definition in some way. Yeah, I would think that you would constantly be thinking about that operational definition with every study that you read, right? And just to know if you're even on the right track. I would also, if I were you, I would go to Cochrane and I would look at my condition and all the treatments that are there under Cochrane, and I would see how did Cochrane evaluate all these? Because Cochrane is doing exactly what I'm asking you to do, right? They're comparing studies and trying to find out who's got better outcomes. So what criteria did they use, right? And so they're going to tell you, they're going to do the heavy lifting for you, right? They're going to be looking at the qualitative factors and the quantitative factors, and they're going to be telling you what's the high level evidence, what's the low level evidence. They do it. That's why I start digging first. Because at least they're going to help you establish, did you do a paper in anorexia? Yeah, it was if you know what we did, we
we pulled Cochrane up and we started looking at, all of the criteria to establish, what would be a treatment success for anorexia, right? Because it was just BMI, but it's not just BMI because there's a bunch of other factors. So we had to look at all those other different factors, and we went to Cochrane and we saw, hey, they were studying this, this, and this. So, great, use it. It makes sense. What else we got? You sticking with anorexia? And just keep hitting yourself in the head with a hammer. That's a tough one. I mean, it's just because it's so variable and it's all psych factors. But look, even in psych, though, I mean, that's where, with all the psychological conditions and with the treatments that go into to measuring all of that, it's done statistically. That's how they do it, right? So you can't even look at the clinical data without those stats because you're dealing with something that's so unmanageable. But the statistics are the thing to bear it out. So if they can do the statistical validation of it, that's the best evidence you're going to get. If you ever get hung up on that stuff, just walk down the hall and talk to Dr. Kashino. She's down there and she's a real, she's a cognitive psychologist, but she's also a statistician. Talk about someone who quick to point out the faults of every study. She's the one who just, she opens a study and she's like, this is crap. She's pretty good. So. All right, anything else? I'll be happy to hang around and talk about your topics individually with you if you want. But nothing matters more in this class than paper 4 but paper 5. Right? These are things that matter the most. So I'm asking you to do some really heavy lifting here with the research, right? Can you get it all together? Can you read it, understand it? Can you synthesize it? Can you correlate it? Do you know how to analyze and evaluate those things, right? That's the intellectual challenge. But you can't forget about all the writing challenges that go into this as well. The things like, can you stay focused on your argument so that you're not incoherent? You don't have ideas just running off in a bunch of different directions, right? I mean, can you unify that argument back to the thesis? Can you tell me, like, after you have all of these really in-depth conversations, how do we get back to the point that we're trying to make, which is who's got the better treatment option here, right? That's just keeping that unification in mind. Grammatically correct sentences, punctuation, using standard professional level diction, right? Those kind of things. You can't let that stuff slide. And this is going to happen, right? You're going to get so overwhelmed with your research and you get crushed for time that you're going to let that stuff, slip at the end when you're supposed to be doing that editing, and you can't allow for those things to happen. You got to be good on all fronts, right? You've got to be good on the content end, and you've got to be good on the presentation end. So if you think about it, all 6 of the objectives are at work in this paper: unity, coherence, grammar, and diction. Plus, can you follow the AMA manual, the presentation of research, and can you abide by the principles of information literacy, which is how do you use the information to make your argument? This is it. These are the 6 objectives, all wrapped up. This is your first paper, and then when you're done with this paper, you're going to go right back and you're going to do it again for me for paper 5. And then on July 7th, you can rest. All right? So a week doing this, a week doing that. I think I give you like a week and a half for paper 5, though, right? Yeah.
What is the due date for paper 5?
I think it's the 5th.
Okay.
5th or 6th. 6th, I think, right?
Then paper 6 is due the 7th.
Yeah, we'll worry about paper 6, whether we're even going to do that, because I'm assuming that there will be many of you who will be in panic mode on July 5th, saying, I can't get this done by tomorrow, right? Which that gives me July 7th to kind of allow you some flexibility to do that. If we have to go into July 7th to take in these last papers, I'm willing to do that. But you just have to understand, paper 6, it's more, I might do some experimenting with it this year. It's kind of like a small percentage of your grade that just is kind of a culminating thing. Like I might have you take paper 5 and just condense it down to 2 pages or something. Or I may have you do a self-assessment paper where you kind of evaluate what you've learned over the course of time. It's not something that's going to be, inventive, right? You're not gonna have to start, it's not gonna be hard. You can sit down, bang it out in probably a couple of hours, whatever challenge I provide for you, right? And it'll be mostly in a take-home environment. I'll give it to you, you just email it to me or something. But I'm less concerned about that and more concerned about paper 5, because that's the biggie. That's when it's worth like 45% of your grade or something, right? So, I mean, it's a huge chunk. So I guess, look, the most important things here for all of this is, can you read the research and can you make decisions about it? Because as a clinician, that's what we need you to be able to do, right? We need you to be able to pick up those journals whenever that stuff comes out and you're reading about your profession, you're staying current with the information in your field. You can read it, you can understand it, and you can be able to implement or support or reject and move on, right? Start thinking about other things.
And when is paper 4 due? I think I'm still just.
I think it's a week from yesterday, right? Yeah, so it's Monday, the 26th. Yeah. 26th. Yeah, thanks. By 5, yeah. And look, you don't have enough time to do this. I'm just telling you now, right? I mean, so you're going to just be crushed for time to get this done. Don't try to push that deadline back, because if you push that deadline back, that leaves you less time to do paper 5, and then you'll be in a worse panic with paper 5, because on paper 5, you're starting all over again. At least with paper 4, you're building off of something that you've already done, so you have some understanding of how to do it. So now it's just about fact-finding with your research. Paper 5, you're going to have to start all over, right? And that's going to take you just maybe a couple of days just to do kind of the background reading, just to figure out what you're going to do in order to start thinking about an operational definition and working through it, and then go out and start finding all the research, right? And that's going to be 5 more days, and then, you got to write the paper still. So I'm always flexible on due dates. I just will tell you that. I'm usually not, but in the summer I am. But you've got to understand the course ends on July 7th, and at that point, you're shortchanging yourself if you're just not leaving yourself time to finish that up. So, I mean, I understand it's a huge time commitment, but that's what you signed up for. So you can get it done. Just work hard. And be perfect. That's what I want. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, good. All right, thanks for coming in today, folks. I really appreciated your questions and input and those kind of things, helping move the conversation along. And by all means, I am always available to answer your questions for you about things. If you're concerned about a section of your paper that you're writing and maybe you're worried about the citations or the AMA format or something like that, ask questions, right? Now, if you ask me a question for which the book is plainly and obviously giving you that information, right? I'm going to say, go to page whatever and look it up yourself, right? I'm not going to do the work for you, but if you're confused about anything along the way, don't hesitate to send me that email to say, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing here, or maybe I've written this paragraph and I just want to make sure that I'm abiding by the clear and obvious rules, and I'm sure I'd be happy to help you along with that. This is fun, isn't it? This is your field. Good stuff. All right. We'll see you.